So tonight we are thrilled to have with us Doug Henderson, celebrating the launch of his delightful new novel, The Cleveland Heights LGBTQ Sci-Fi and Fantasy Role-Playing Club, and is published by University of Iowa Press. It is an excellent way for our City Lights to continue our celebration of Pride Month with this terrific, quirky, and really engaging novel. So it explores the lives and culture of a group of gamers as their role-playing intersects with their everyday lives. Doug uses the backdrop of a very touching love story and friendship to explore some deep issues like homophobia, social anxiety, and things like coming out. So all in all, it's a really brilliant bit of storytelling, which I think you'll all enjoy. Doug is winner of the 2019 Dau Short Story Prize for Emerging Writers for his short story, The Manga Artist, which was also runner-up for the 2018 Iowa Review Award for Fiction. So Cleveland Heights is his debut novel. Originally from Cleveland, he received his MFA from the University of San Francisco. He makes his home in the Castro District with his husband, their 2 children, and a large collection of role-playing games. Yes, indeed. So joining Doug tonight in conversation is K.M. Soehnlein. K.M. Soehnlein is the author of the novels The World of Normal Boys, Robin and Ruby, and You Can Say You Knew Me When. His next novel is Army of Lovers, coming out in 2022 from Amble Press. He teaches writing at the University of San Francisco, where he was Doug Henderson's instructor. And now it is a great honor and pleasure to have you both gracing our virtual halls. Doug Henderson, K.M. Soehnlein, welcome to City Lights Live.
Thank you so much. It is a huge thrill and an honor. Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much.
Yay, I'm glad to be here. It's great to see some friends and former students and USF folks and folks from other parts of the world and people who know and love Doug. Great to see all of you. Thanks for spending your Thursday evening with us. I'm actually on the East Coast, not in my usual home of San Francisco. I have taken my first trip out of San Francisco since we couldn't go anywhere. Family and friends and all that kind of stuff. So I'm in a beautiful colonial era hotel room in Lafayette, Pennsylvania right now. That's what all this kind of frippery behind me is. This is not my taste in art. Doug, are you in your home? Are those your bookshelves behind you?
Yes, this is my taste in books behind me.
I like that yours is prominently featured. That's good, good advertising. Part of your launching your first book is that you have to always promote yourself at every step of the way.
Right.
You probably figured that out already, haven't you? How is it going so far, Doug, with your first book?
Good, I think. I mean, it's been a lot of fun. It's interesting. I think debuting still in the pandemic, but you know, it's going well. It's amazing.
Well, this night I feel like had its roots in a completely random moment when we ran into each other at the Castro Farmers Market, right?
Yes.
One of those things where we hadn't seen each other for years and we started talking and Doug said, remember that book I was working on when I was your student at USF? And I was like, yes, of course, I have not forgotten it. I've never forgotten those characters. They were amazing. And Doug, tell everyone what happened. I think how did you get it into print? It's kind of interesting. You had a piece of it published or something?
No, so I landed a short story in the Iowa Review, and then that story went on to win this PEN America Award, which is also for the journal that discovered you. It's a prize for debut writers. And so it's also for the journal that discovers you. So I went to this award ceremony in New York. It was very exciting. And the editors of the Iowa Review were also there. And we got to meet in person for the very first time, which is amazing. And they said, oh, we've heard that you also have a novel that you're shopping around. Because I had this novel. At that time, it had received 27 rejections. I had like officially from agents, I hadn't tried presses or editors yet. I put it aside. Well, I have 2 kids. I had a daughter at the time. I put it aside. I thought maybe it's going to be the next novel that will land, or I don't know what. I had switched to short stories. That seemed to be going well. But they said, we'd love to read it if you want to send it to us. And of course, I was freaking out, trying to play it cool. And I sent it to them. The editor, Lynn, read it on the road trip and emailed me in all caps, I love your novel. And she pitched it to the director and he also liked it. And here we are.
I love the magic of all of that coming together.
All right. Well, I have to thank you again because you were the one who suggested short stories. You were the one who encouraged me to enter contests, to try short stories. And I think that that route, at least worked for me.
Yeah, what I see a lot, and those of you who've been through MFA programs or other writing workshops, you know, folks who are working on like one novel for a really long time often get very kind of just, well, you just dedicated to it. You're just doing this one thing. And when you write shorter pieces, you have this sense of accomplishment and completion, right? And you also have something to send out to be published, which I guess, as you found out, gave you an opportunity to publish something first that ultimately led right to the longer piece.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that was good advice I gave you. I'm really glad.
Yeah. Me too. It worked out.
I read this book in its early drafts back in, when were you in at USF, in like
2011, 2012?
Yeah. So you, why don't you talk a little about where the idea first came for this book and how you came to be writing it at that time?
Yeah. So I think there are many origin stories, like any, I don't know, superhero or something. I was working retail with my friend Melanie, who is here tonight, and sort of, writing on the side. I wanted to be a writer. I had all these short stories. My bachelor's was in English with creative writing focus. So I always thought like, oh, I'm a writer, even though here I am working retail. And I went to various kinds of workshops around the city. I couldn't get any stories published. But I really thought, okay, I'm a writer. And that was the dream, and it still probably is the dream. And I spent a week or so one night with my then boyfriend, now husband. And I said, I'm going to read you one of my short stories every night when we go to bed. And that was maybe kind of risky, but it went really well. And he liked them. And he also encouraged me. And I think that's important, to have someone with you that sees value in what you want to do and, encourages you. At some point, his job sent him to Sweden. And he said, hey, want to quit your job and move to Sweden with me for a few months? And I said, sure. And while we were there, he would go off and work, and I would go to a cafe and write what sort of became this novel. I was working on a short story at the time about a D&D nerd and a heavy metal nerd and their kind of budding romance. And it just kept expanding and expanding. And I realized then, and I realize even more so now, that really the only reason I could write that story was because I fell in love. And I think that in falling in love, that just, I don't know, it just opened something up, like a chakra or a lotus leaf petal or something, or a puzzle box, I don't know. But from that came all this creative energy. And I think that, to me, that is like the real, where the story really comes from, where the book really comes from. And I think like, maybe that's not the most useful, like craft kind of comment. But I think that it's not just important to like have something to say, but I think that it's important to have something to feel. And I didn't write this book because I had something to say, but I had something to feel. And that's sort of the origin of where it came from. This love story between this D&D nerd and this heavy metal nerd that kind of spiraled out. And it got big enough. I thought, let's take it to grad school, see if I can get more eyes and more feedback on it. And it's here now in the world for everyone.
Yeah, that's amazing. Something, not just something to write about, but something to feel. I'm going to remember that. That's beautiful. Thanks. Well, I think maybe for folks who haven't yet gotten a chance to read the book or aren't familiar with it, maybe this is a good time to let you dive in a little. We talked about maybe having you introduce this nerd, Ben, to the crowd tonight.
Yeah, so we're just going to start in the beginning with Ben, who is our protagonist.
Go ahead. I'll mute during this.
Okay. Everyone can hear me okay? Everyone in the back? This is from the first chapter called The Summoning. Ben stood in the basement and called upstairs. Mom, have you seen my dice bag up there? What dice bag, sweetheart? His mother replied from the kitchen. My only dice bag. He'd been using that same dice bag since high school. It's made of purple velvet, ties with a string. Where'd you leave it last? I thought on my desk, but, oh, well, that explains it. His mother stepped into the doorway. She wore her glasses around her neck on a silver chain. That place is such a mess down there. It's a wonder you can even find your desk. Mom, please, I'm in a hurry. Ben slid on his yellow windbreaker. Of course she would bring this up now as he was rushing to get out the door. Can you help me look? It's not up here, I can tell you that. Mom, please just look. As Ben continued his search, his cat, Onigiri, slipped between his legs and ran ahead of him. He kicked past piles of dirty clothes, dirty dishes, and empty beer cans. He pushed aside stacks of books and comics on his desk. He dug past his pencil cup, crammed full, and moved around the dusty model of the Death Star he made in the 7th grade, but no dice bag. Last Thursday, after gaming, he'd come in through the front door, not the cellar door, because he was starving and he wanted to make something to eat. He'd slipped into the kitchen, warmed up some macaroni and cheese, and then crept downstairs without turning on a light. He dropped his backpack by the lazy boy, put his books on his desk, his wallet by the empty aquarium, and his dice bag? Ben closed his eyes. He felt through the air with his fingers and stretched out his mind, expanding it into every nook and corner of the basement, under the bed, behind the bookshelves, through the dark and musty shadows of the storage room. Lucky dice, little dice, where art thee? Manifest before me on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Ben glanced at the floor between his feet. Nothing. He looked at his desk. Onigiri looked back, blinking, as the dust settled upon the Death Star. God, he was an idiot. What was he thinking? Magic doesn't exist. Those dice were just dumb pieces of plastic. He knew that, and still he was such a weirdo all the time. No wonder he couldn't get a boyfriend. Ben collapsed onto the lazy boy. Above him, the basement door opened with a squeak. Ben, honey, are these them? From the top of the stairs came the sound of dice shaking in their bag. Yes. He dashed up the steps, and his mother dropped the velvet pouch into his hand. Thanks. Where were they? They were on the floor, next to the couch. But I looked there. Sometimes when you're in a rush, you don't see things that are right in front of your face. And sometimes, Ben said, objects of power don't reveal themselves to the mortal plane unless called forth with a summoning spell. His mother tisked. You've been playing too many of those games. But it worked, Ben said as he headed downstairs. His mother called after him. I only say that because I worry. You have to think about the real world too, you know. Think about your future. You're almost 30 after all. Mom, I'm 25. That's almost 30 in my book. Mom, stop. They had already talked a million times about his future. I'm going out the back. I'll be home later. With that, Ben climbed up the creaky ladder, through the cellar doors, and set out. And that's Ben. Am I muted? Carl, you're on mute, I think.
Yeah, I muted myself while you were reading, but I'm not a host, so I can't unmute myself. Thank you, Peter, if you did that from the background. Yay, love it. You're getting some loves it and claps from the house. So Ben, what are we going to say about Ben? He's 25. His mom thinks he's almost 30 and a loser. He's a believer in magic, except when he's full of self-doubt and deprecation and thinks he's a weirdo and should give it all up. Tell us how you came to know and understand, develop and love or not love Ben. Tell us about Ben.
I mean, I probably lived it, but I think Ben is has a lot of other influences as well. I was influenced by Harvey Pekar, who's a Cleveland writer and comic book writer. I was also influenced by Charles Schulz and Charlie Brown. Part of the reference with Ben's yellow windbreaker is the famous Charlie Brown yellow sweater. He has that kind of good grief, woe is me, nothing ever goes right kind of sensibility about him. Yeah, I think he lives in a sort of poverty of expectations, never expects that anything good or exciting will happen to him, and doesn't know how to process it in the beginning when things do start going right. You know, it can't possibly be happening, but it sort of does by the end.
And as you spent time writing and rewriting the book, revising over the years, did you discover things about Ben you didn't expect, you know, beyond what your maybe original vision was?
Yeah, I think I had to discover things about him. I think he is very introverted, doesn't really want to interact with people, just wants to be in the basement or in his own fantasy world. There's a scene in here where he goes to a death metal show, and that was initially a challenge to write, took many revisions. The first time I think he didn't go into the concert, he just stayed outside. And so each revision he got closer until, I mean, I don't want to give away the final thing. I think I first workshopped that at USF with Louis Busby, who was here tonight. So yeah, I think I did learn about him as I had to push him into action and get him to do things and figure out what would motivate him or how to get him to go and do things. Maybe every character has that problem. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that is often something we discover in our first novels is, we're inside the mind of a character, but getting him or her or them to actually act and kind of to get them in the door, as you're saying, and not just standing on the outside, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And did Ben ultimately surprise you in this book? I mean, people talk about that, right? The characters directing them more than they direct the characters as the writing happens.
Yeah, I guess he did surprise me. Probably in little ways that I can't even recall. I mean, it always was just such a blossoming when he would, I don't know, act or do something or have some realization. I think those were always nice to see. The Metal Club, the ending of the story, all of these moments, I think, were really, to me, satisfying to experience with Ben.
Great. Yeah, I loved watching him grow. It's always great when you're a reader and you're sort of frustrated with the protagonist at the beginning of the book, because you're like, you have something to root for over time. Like, will he get it together?
Right.
I mean, I won't reveal anything, but
okay. Yeah.
It's not a tragedy. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
So the other thing that jumps right out from this book, I think, is this like kind of hilarious and amazing title. It's one of the longer titles I've ever seen on a book cover, and every word of it is bold. But I want to start with the first three words: Cleveland Heights. The Cleveland Heights. Cleveland. We don't see a lot of fiction about Cleveland, Doug. Tell us about that.
But you said we don't see a lot of fiction about Cleveland?
Not really. I mean, compared to like how many stories we see about New York City, say.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's true. So I'm originally from Cleveland, and I just made a big decision a long time ago. I went to Kent State and made a decision that I was going to be a Cleveland writer. I wanted to write about people from Cleveland. It was the most natural to me, and that experience was the most natural to me. So I never wanted to shy away from that or not write about that. I feel like I know those people. I know that place. I know the vibe of it and the feeling of it. And it was always something I always wanted to write about. And Coventry Road and Cleveland Heights in particular, ever since I very first went there in college, it was probably like somebody in the Bay Area, like in Danville or somewhere, coming to Haight Street or the Mission for the first time and just, their world explodes. It's like, how did this all exist? How did I not know before? Of course, on a smaller, like Cleveland level scale, right? And so I always wanted to write about it. I had hoped that I would write about it someday. And yeah, that was it.
I think, sometimes the places that seem so ordinary when you're from there seem incredibly exotic to people who've never been. And I think you create a kind of exotic Cleveland on the page, which it's on my list now, places I have to visit.
Awesome. That's rad. I think you'll have a great time. Cleveland is a really great city.
Yeah.
To visit.
I'm ready. I'm totally ready for Cleveland. I'm probably not that far from it where I'm in Pennsylvania. Maybe I should just.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Probably not.
Would you read a little bit of that scene that we had talked about that kind of sets the stage of the part of the city you're talking about?
Yeah. Okay. Coventry Road in Cleveland Heights was a power ballad, a nap, a rainbow, a dull noise, a clusterfuck, a nostalgia, a dream. Coventry Road was coming and going, brick and steel and rust and graffiti and gum-stuck pavement and tattered awnings and trash in the gutter. Mom and pop shops of eclectic attractions, bookstores, restaurants, head shops, and a lonely record store and noisy poetry readings and bars, taverns, pubs. Its inhabitants were, as the story goes, hippies, punks, dropouts, and deadbeats. Had the story been turned to another page, it might have read yuppies and hipsters and heroes, and it would have told the same tale.
And that's beautiful. I love that list of everything it is. I think you mentioned when we were just warming up tonight that you did an event like this for a Cleveland bookstore. How did that go?
I think it went really well. That was on like the pub day. They hosted me for an event and I read that paragraph. So there is a bookstore in the book that is inspired by the bookstore that I did the reading at. And that was also an amazing experience. At that time, the book was very new. I think most people had not read it. But yeah, it was really great. And I think that they texted me, oh no, another bookstore in Cleveland texted me to say that they're on their third reordering. So I think it's doing well in that area. Yeah, hopefully people there like it and can recognize it. I think there's some fun in knowing all of the places that are mentioned in the book.
Yeah, for sure. You're a hometown hero, I guess. I just want to tell everyone that you are welcome to put questions in the chat. I think you're unable to mute yourselves, but if you do have questions, don't be shy. We're going to crowdsource this night. It's not all about me and Doug. I mean, it's all about Doug. It's not all about me talking to Doug. Tell us about the comic book store. Okay, I have to admit, I was not a gamer as a kid. I did not do D&D. I was given a D&D set, and I didn't know what to do with it, and I didn't realize I had to find other friends who knew about like. It was beyond me, but I'm really into the fact that you finally let me sort of vicariously be it.
Yeah, totally.
Tell us about the scene.
Yeah, I don't know what to say. I mean, I always went to comic book stores and gaming stores before I could even drive. I would have to beg my parents to please take me. And they would say like, why do you want to go to this place called the Games of War? That sounds terrible. Or that doesn't sound like the place for a 14-year-old or something. And my parents would find my D&D books and think they were satanic. This was like during a satanic panic, like in the 80s and 90s. My mom would say, that doesn't look like something you would like reading. And I would say, oh no, I borrowed that. I didn't like reading it. It's so scary. Yeah, so I always loved those places. I always wanted to write about them. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. I lived in them and felt I could easily write about them and bring them to life on the page.
The games that get played, so for folks who aren't familiar with the book before this discussion, so a lot of the book contains this group of young adults, the fantasy and role-playing club, actually playing games in the back of this comic book store, right? So they're playing D&D and then we're in D&D. And there's a great question in the chat from Tyler Darnell, which says, can you talk about the relationship between the D&D game and the real world in your novel? That's a big one, right? That's like kind of what the book is all about, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I could talk about that for sure. So I knew from the beginning that this would be a story, a braided story, kind of metafiction that wove in and out of the real world and the game world, and that each would affect the other, and that the weaving of this would become so tight, especially for Ben, that it wasn't sustainable and it would eventually break. And that's the basic sort of core conceit of the book, or the core conceit of the structure of the book even. It gets to a point where it breaks and Ben can no longer continue the game, and that crumbles everything. Spoiler alert. And so that was always a core part of the book. I hope that answers the question. But yes, there's a lot of overlap between what happens in the real world and the game world. They both kind of play out in both areas.
Yeah, the game isn't its own thing where like the book stops and then we go off into some storytelling land. Like the subtext of the game is that these people are working their shit out through avatars in these roles.
Yes.
So tell us about Ben's character in the game and how you came up with this particular character. When Ben plays the game, he isn't Ben, he is.
So when Ben plays the game, he is Bjorndar, the druid. He's also very quickly killed and spends most of the game dead as a severed head riding around in someone's backpack, which is sort of a metaphor for Ben at the opening of the book. Yeah, is that what you wanted to hear? I don't know what else to say.
I mean, it is a bit of a spoiler, but it happens in the first chapter. Like Ben's character in the game gets beheaded, and I'm sorry, I'm laughing just thinking about it because I remember reading your manuscript all those years ago, and even when I got the book again and read it again, and I got to that moment, I'm like, oh right, he freaking killed Ben's character like within the first chapter of the book. So I guess it makes the whole book feel a little bit like Ben has got to be reborn and through Bjorndar, right? That's a little bit of the story, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But I think that's also an example of how the two layers are interacting and weaving back and forth. You know, there's other kind of examples probably.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks for that question, Tyler, and feel free to ask another if you'd like.
Yeah, I think that answered it for you.
Yeah. Lewis asks, that passage you read about Coventry Road, did you have a literary model for that? Because I hear one, Lewis says. We may have to find out who Lewis thinks it is, but he wants to know what your literary model is.
So I have a lot of literary models, and the book also has, or just myself in general as an artist and a writer, I'm very inspired by, this is probably not Lewis's answer, but by the French auteurs who, when they were making their movies, would just do whatever they wanted. If they wanted to zoom, they would do a zoom. If they wanted to switch to black and white, they'd switch to black and white, whatever. Silent film will do it, whatever feels right at the moment. And so I knew when I was writing this novel that I wanted to have that kind of freedom. Like if I wanted to suddenly write a paragraph that was like a list, then I could do that. Or if I wanted to have a section where I zoomed in really close on somebody's pancakes while they were eating, I wanted to be able to do that. Or, you know, there's something happens during another event between the main characters that these are all like kind of unique moments that aren't often repeated in the book. But in terms of more literal like models, I read a lot of Tales of the City and John Steinbeck, Cannery Row when I was reading these. So that's probably more what Lewis is thinking. I see he's nodding or something. Yeah.
Indeed, he has said that he was thinking of Steinbeck's Cannery Row. Same tone and approach.
Yes. Yeah. Because they're about, you know, people in a time and place. And I was very inspired by that kind of thing. Yeah. Of course, Lewis would know.
Yeah, Lewis, a famous Steinbeck aficionado.
Yeah.
Awesome. Don is asking, hi Don, was there a time during the writing of this book when something happened to you in your writing practice that surprised you? Or when something emerged in the story or a character that surprised you?
Yes, I think that there were three main parts of this novel that were really hard to break through on. I know, Carl, you and I worked on one. One of them is a scene I worked on in Busby's workshop. Then another is a North Coast festival the characters go to later. The first, there is a kiss-in in the book. And I knew for the longest time that there was going to be a kiss-in, and this was going to be a huge event in the book. But I could not write it for whatever reason. I had a huge block. I'd never had any kind of a block before, but for whatever reason, I just couldn't write this kiss-in. And I think when I first submitted to you over summer thesis, I gave you like 12 pages and you were like, is there going to be a problem? I don't know if you remember, Carl, but I just could not get through it. So I went with my husband. This is going to be a long story. So I went with my husband on his high school reunion, and another friend of his from high school was also a writer. And not that I was a writer at the time, but was a writer, published Star Wars stories for young adults or novels for young adults, and was fairly successful at that. And I asked him for some advice. I told him how I was trying to write this scene. I just could not break through and write it. And he said, oh, whenever I'm stuck, I draw it. And so I went home and I drew it. So for this kiss-in, I drew the bar where the kiss-in is going to be. I put all the characters. Here's where they're going to go. Here's where the jukebox is. They're going to walk this way. And that's totally broke me through it. I don't even know how. It was amazing. And that did it for me. It totally worked. So that's my advice to someone who's stuck. Like, just switch things up, do it totally differently, draw it or something entirely, sing it. I don't know, do something totally different. So that was a surprise for me. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. So somehow by visually imagining it on the page, you found the words for it.
Yeah.
That's really remarkable. That's so interesting. I'd love someone who is like a psychologist to tell us how one side of the brain can like be blocked until the other side unlocks it.
Oh, interesting.
The the phrase writing practice was also mentioned in Don's question, and I wonder kind of what was your writing habit or practice through this writing of this book, and I imagine since it took some years to do that it might have changed. Can you just
Yeah.
talk about that? I know there are other writers in the room and people
Yeah.
sometimes like to compare notes.
Yeah. So one of the first things I can say about this book is it was entirely handwritten. I wrote the first drafts of it all in a notebook with pen and paper, and then would type them in, and then sometimes print them out, mark them up, rewrite them by hand even, and then enter them back in. And it was a kind of process that had a lot of built-in revision into it, and a lot of, really looking at the lines and the sentences built into that process. So it took a very long time, obviously. But I didn't know how else to write, I guess, at the time. And it totally worked for me. It felt very hands-on, which I like. I guess I like. So I would say, yeah, that was probably the biggest thing about my process. I'm also a big outliner. I'm not really like a go by your pants kind of person. I do a lot of outlining. I also do a lot of drafting. The nice thing for me about writing a paper, I can like mark up the margins. I can draw all over things, put arrows and move this here. And, it can get really physical in a way that I don't know how to do yet with computer or a tablet or something. So yeah, I think outlining, recognizing where the gaps are, filling them in, creating those scenes, that really is what works for me, I think, even still.
Thanks. Yeah, that's great. I the most recent thing I wrote, I did it by hand from scratch instead of being on the computer, and it really feels differently. I found, tell me if you found this too, that you don't edit everything right away, right? It kind of sits there on the page before you get back to it. Did you find that also?
Yes, for sure. Yeah. Or, you can write a paragraph and then rewrite it just underneath it, or I can rewrite a joke like in a whole like stream of revisions right away. That I have a hard time doing typing. I don't know why.
Yeah. Do you want to read another section? I think we had talked about, was it Ben and Albert?
Oh, you want Ben and Albert? Or you want something in the game?
Oh, let's do the game since people have been asking about the game. Yeah, we can always do more. I love hearing you read it.
All right. So this will be in the game world. Ben is Bjorndar, Albert is Flamebender. This is when they first ever played the game together. Ben is not quite yet warmed up to Albert joining the game. There's some other characters that, you'll learn about later. Gunther led the way as they walked through the dense forest, keeping to the well-worn road. Thieg absently strummed his lute as they followed along. Flamebender took up the rear. A low mist clung to the ground about their ankles. The sky was overcast. What could be seen of it through the thick canopy of leaves? As they came to a bend in the road, Flamebender saw a flash of something to his right, a glimpse of pale flesh. A shirtless young man with dark, tousled hair was running through the trees. He had a playful smile on his face, and when their eyes met, he gave Flamebender a wink. Curious, Flamebender pulled his polearm from his back and stepped off the road and into the forest. The music from Thieg's lute had grown louder, fuller, and richer, accompanied by a flute and drum. Where is that music coming from? Gunther asked. The party stopped to listen. Thieg stopped strumming his lute, but still the music continued. What happened to the new guy? Bjorndar asked. Gunther, Thieg, and Bjorndar were alone on the road. Flamebender was nowhere to be found, and still the strange music filled the air. They called out for Flamebender, but there was no answer, only the music. Someone is rocking out on that flute, Bjorndar said. How did we lose a paladin in full plate armor? It wasn't my job to watch him, Bjorndar said. I think he lost himself, Thieg said. The music was growing louder, closing in on them. Thieg crept toward the edge of the forest. The flute is so close. He peered between the trees, trying to see into the dense undergrowth. It's just right there. No, don't. Bjorndar grabbed Thieg by the arm before he could step off the road. Don't go into the forest. It isn't safe. Let's carry on with our quest, Gunther said. No doubt we'll find the source of that music, or it will find us. What about the paladin? Thieg asked. Meh, Bjorndar shrugged. The new guy. I bet my beard if we find the music, we'll find him too, Gunther said. They continued down the road and the music traveled with them. The haunting flute was never more than a few feet away. Thieg tried to play a counter melody, but the music of the forest changed to match his tune. Eventually they came to a small trail that branched to the right. This is the way to the cave, Gunther said. It isn't far. Be on your guard, Bjorndar said, as they stepped onto the narrow trail. They crept quietly through the underbrush as they approached the dark maw of the cave. I'll cast invisibility and scout inside, Bjorndar said. You guys wait here. Bjorndar mumbled a few indecipherable words and then vanished. The music stopped. Oh shit, Thieg said. Gunther did not look concerned. As anyone who fights me is going to go down as quickly as a keg of dwarven stout, which is to say, pretty quickly. Good one, Thieg said. How do you come up with that stuff? I read a lot of books. I read a lot of comics, Thieg said. About dwarves? No. Then there's your problem. From the shadows, Bjorndar reappeared. Flamebender is in there, unconscious, he said. Whoever captured him has stripped him half naked and placed him on some type of an altar. You don't see anyone else, Gunther asked? No cultists? No, but there are an awful lot of hoof prints. Hoof prints? They're too small to belong to a horse, more like a goat's. Thieg asked, why would goats want to sacrifice a paladin? Stop there.
One of the things I love about this is when they're all in the game, but then you hear the characters actually speak like the people who aren't the characters, sort of like, oh, that's the new guy, or, I read comics, and these kinds of lines that slip through. Was that slippage something you just played around with from the start and just kind of let happen?
Yes. And I think there's other, of course, examples as well. Yeah, I think that's, for me, one of the fun parts of writing it. And I think that it's an example of how people really play the game. I think people don't really stay in character and break immersion all the time. And, it's natural. I had never seen it done quite like that, so I really wanted to do it.
Yeah, it's super fun. And it's even though you do it and then do it again, every time it happens, it sort of creates this little sort of giggle for me, because it keeps breaking, and it takes the seriousness right out of the role playing, right? It's always a little bit up for grabs.
Right.
There's another question here from Tyler saying, I love that Ben thinks Albert is too hot to play D&D with them. He's not used to his role-playing game tendencies accompanied with sexual tension. I guess that's not a question, but do you want to say anything about Ben and sexual tension in role-playing games and Albert and the whole love story at the center of the book?
Yeah, so I think that Ben, at least initially, is not comfortable with that kind of thing. I think he's not comfortable being near people who are good looking. I don't know what it is about him. I think he doesn't value himself enough or see enough beauty in his own self, maybe. I think there's a mention very early on that there's no sex in D&D, but then we eventually see that it becomes very sexualized and there is sex in their D&D. Because I think that's just how their game naturally evolves with their relationships as well. Yeah, I don't know. Is that answering the question or?
So tell us a little bit more about where Albert came from. You said you started with this idea of these two characters. So one of them became Ben and one became Albert. Where did he come from?
Yeah. So I don't know. I always also had an interest in metal and in like heavy metal guys and punk rock guys and that type of edgy kind of guy. It was always very interesting to me to meet queer versions of metalheads. Who might like just simply wear like a pink triangle pin on their jacket. And that was like the only thing that I would know, like, oh, that guy is actually queer. And that was always interesting to me. And I thought as a romantic interest, it would be a very fun kind of character to write. Albert is from Detroit, which always seemed like a very metal kind of city to me. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Yeah. I mean, it's super clear why he has a crush, right? It's there from the start. Right. Pam says an uncomfortable scene for Ben is when he goes in the metal club with Albert. Was that hard to write?
Yes, so that was one of the big top 3 scenes that were difficult to write. Because I knew that scene was going to be huge for Ben and Albert, sort of where Albert would really see that Ben might be viable as a boyfriend, and Ben himself might feel like, I could do this. I didn't initially know in the beginning what that scene was going to, how that scene was going to take shape. Like I said, I had a hard enough time just getting Ben into the club. And at first, I think he got like into the crowd. They were in the back. He didn't want to go up front. Yeah, I don't know. It had various revisions and iterations. And then we had an exercise in Busby's workshop where we had to crank things up to 11. And this chapter was coming up. And I went for a walk in the mission. And I don't know, it just, the ideas came to me and I hopefully cranked it up to 11. I took it to as far as I could in its logical conclusion, I think.
It definitely gets to 11. It's one of my favorite scenes in the book.
Okay.
So good job. Yeah, I'm glad you got pushed.
Me too.
Yeah. Back to Mr. Busby. This book made me for the first time want to play D&D. Am I too old? He asks.
What? Of course not. No one's too old to use their imagination, Louis. Come on.
And Peter from City Lights is concurring. Never, with 4 exclamation points. So
Right.
I haven't played either, Busby. Maybe we should
Oh.
start our own over the hill, too old to play role game.
Do it. It's roll initiative.
I can't wait to develop my character. I haven't yet thought about it.
Yeah.
All right, maybe we'll start a whole like role-playing game out of this chat room tonight.
That would be amazing. That would be amazing.
It would be legendary.
So down to talk about people's characters.
Totally. It's so natural for writers, right? Like we do this all the time anyway, right? We make up.
Yeah. The mini game of character creation is my favorite part of the game. I could just like sit at a table and make characters all night.
Okay, Emily's in and Don's in. So I think, do we have to have 4? It seems like in the book they say like Celeste, who is another great character, she needs 4, right? Is that right?
Yeah, I think officially you need 4, but you know, whatever.
Yeah.
I've played with like more than 10. Let's do it.
All right. Well, we've got at least 4. Okay, this shit is happening. This is amazing. Yeah. All right. City Lights is hosting. Awesome. All right, good. I skipped over Sonia's question because it felt like a little bit more of a summary, but I want to scroll back up and say, Sonia, thank you for asking, how much do you miss these characters? And without any spoilers, might you continue their story in the future?
Yeah, so I miss them a lot, which is interesting because I spent so many years with them. I continue to think about them. I think there could be more stories about them. That was never initially my intention. I've always said that if there was a sequel, it would be about the Vampire Club, because I would really like to write about those characters more. Spoiler alert, there's vampires in the book. Yeah, so I think it's possible. And I recently saw a tip somewhere that was like, if you can't come up with a sequel, then come up with a prequel. And I think there is kind of a hint already that, you know, when the book starts, the game is like falling apart and Celeste is looking for more players. So maybe there's an idea for a prequel of how it came about. I don't know. But yeah, I would love to revisit them probably.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love every bit of that. Prequel, sequel, bring it on.
Right.
You know, sometimes publishers are looking for that, right? Like when the book finds its audience, they're like, give them more of that. So if you have ideas, don't be shy.
Okay.
Let's see, Melanie, what about telling the story from different characters' perspectives? Yes, you have all, we haven't even gotten to Valerie, Polly, Celeste, I mean, Varnick, there's so many other characters. Great question, Melanie.
Yeah, so about that, I mean, that was tough too. And one of the reasons to take the book to grad school so that I could focus on that and kind of hone those voices and figure out how to do that. I knew again early on, as the initial story was expanding, I knew that there would be other point of view characters. Once I realized that there was a whole gaming group here and then a whole neighborhood and there's a whole world around these people, I knew that there would be other points of views coming in to play with.
And I believe when I saw the book, 7 years ago or whatever it was, that Celeste was not yet Celeste, right? Can you
Right.
talk
Yes.
about developing Celeste as a trans
Yeah. Yeah.
character?
Yeah. So I had always had this idea that I wanted the GM to be trans, and I really didn't know how to go all the way. I guess in my mind, she was going to maybe transition somewhere after the book. It would not really be something in the book, but I would sort of thread hints of it in the book. And then again, like I don't know where that I was just walking or in the shower or something. And I thought, oh, she's gonna be post transition. Let's just do it that way. And here she is post transition, managing her role playing club, creating the world that she wants, to be in and that she wants to present to people. And yeah, that's how that happens.
That's great. I'm glad you did. I love Celeste and being
Thank
in this
you.
book, the T in the LGBTQ, community, right? You're
Yeah, yeah.
widening it. Yeah, that's beautiful. Um, Annie, thanks for your question. I work with the LGBTQ youth in Los Angeles, and they always talk about queer books, shows, movies, etc. When you were writing this book, who did you have in mind?
Yeah, thank you. That's an awesome question. It's really interesting. I I think at that time, this was like, 2011, 2012, there were not many examples. And I was sort of writing against a lot of the things that I was seeing. I guess another initial kernel or seed or something for this book was I wanted it to exist. I couldn't find anything like it. I hadn't really seen gay nerds yet, or queer nerds, or nerds represented in that LGBTQ plus sort of scene. They always seemed to be very, with it, could decorate, knew how to dress, could have a walk off. And none of these characters are really those kind of characters. And so it's tough. I would say I sort of wrote against things more than I was writing towards something, if that makes sense. I don't know. But I really wanted to again broaden that and show, more kinds of queer people.
Yeah, I love that. There's a writer named John Weir who wrote a book that was really influential when I was younger called The Irreversible Decline of Eddie Socket.
Huh.
And he talked about how he wanted to write a book with a gay protagonist who didn't dress well.
Uh-huh.
But he was so
Yeah.
tired of this idea that gay men were fashionable because he was like a self-described slob and he wanted to put a gay slob in the middle of his book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Ani or Annie. I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Thanks for your question. I like that one. Well, we're getting close to 10 o'clock. This is a chance for folks to pile in any last questions. Oh yes, City Lights wants to remind you, if you do not yet have your copy, or if you want to purchase a copy for someone else, it is available at that link. So buy from an independent bookstore, buy from City Lights, our hosts tonight. Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead and follow that link, please. Lewis wants to know what you're working on now.
So yeah, I'm always writing. I have short stories that I'm sending out that are, there's that process. So I'm reminded of a reading that I went to with Ursula Le Guin, where she mentioned very casually a recent rejection that she had received, and the audience gasped. And she turned to the audience and said, "Oh, it never ends." And that's how I feel these days. I'm working on other books. I sort of drafted, I think, 3 novels during the pandemic. 2 of them kind of merged and became one more. If this book is sort of Tales of the City meets D&D, the new book is more like Tales of the City meets the Power Rangers. Because anything with a rainbow, I just need rainbows in whatever I'm writing. Yeah, but always writing, always trying something new.
That's great. I'm so happy to hear that this awful pandemic year we've all been through allowed you to find time for creativity. That's great.
Somehow. It's been great.
Before we go, I mean, you're a dad and
yeah.
kids, and your love is here tonight as well. Do you think about your kids reading your books one day? I know they're quite young, but yeah, tell me about that relationship between being a parent and a
totally.
writer.
I definitely think about them reading the books. I mean, they better read my books. But I also think that they motivate me and they keep me going. Like the thought that like I had this dream and I didn't pursue it is so crushing to me. Like I wouldn't want to have to tell my kids that. Like, oh yeah, your dad wanted to be a writer, but I didn't. I mean, but that's just too heavy for me. So that's one of the reasons I continued to send out stories after my daughter was born, and I didn't put it aside because I just couldn't be that kind of dad. That would just destroy me. And I think it's worked out. So I hope they read my books. I hope someday they understand why they wear so many rainbows. Hope they don't mind.
That's great. That's really beautiful. Yeah, Emily says you are a writer, as are you, Emily.
Yeah,
And
so you.
I mean, how about a word about perseverance in the face of 27 plus rejections? I mean, Ursula Gwynn said it. You're saying it. I can tell you my stories. We all have our multiple rejection stories.
Yeah.
How do you motivate yourself through that kind of, constant no from the world?
I guess I just remind myself that not doing it is worse than the no's. I mean, I think you have to just love it so much that it's not so painful. And the no's are, I mean, no one has ever been like, never write again. Like, don't send anything out into the world. No one has ever rejected me like that. At least luckily, I hope not. At least not to my face. So I think, yeah, you just got to keep going, stay out there, stay in the mix, switch it up if you have to. And yeah, just love it so much that you can't not do it. I don't know how else to say it. It's the only cure for me. It's the only thing that keeps me going. So I see your host is back.
Well,
Actually, sounds like a perfect place to segue. Carl, do you have any final words?
I just want to thank everyone for being here. A small, intimate group like this is really wonderful. So many people got to chime in the chat and ask questions. Thank you. I just am in love with this book. I'm on my third time reading it now. I was gonna just put it down, and I was like, I think I'm just gonna read it through one more time. It's a great gift. It's got a lot of heart. I think if you do know those young queer LGBTQ plus allies, anyone who's a nerd, this is a good book to just let them feel seen. Lewis says it's the funniest book I've read in ages. So tender, so true. So thank you, Doug. Let's all just give Doug like a big old pile of love because he gave us something beautiful. So I'm super
amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both. Thank you, Carl. You make an excellent interviewer. Thanks for everyone in the audience for joining us. It's been so much fun.
It's amazing. I love you all. Thanks, everyone. Carl, thanks so much.
I'm super glad to be here and be part of this night. Thank you. And I'll stick around for a bit if anyone wants to say hi, a few more minutes in my hotel room in Lafayette. You can be part of that. Night, everyone.
Bye all.